The company announcement said I'd left to pursue other opportunities. I was still receiving my salary. The all-hands meeting happened on a Thursday morning. My manager, the CEO of a Series B fintech startup, stood in front of 80 employees and explained that the head of product development was stepping down. He thanked me for my contributions. He said I'd decided to explore new challenges. He introduced my replacement, who'd start the following Monday. I watched the meeting from my apartment in Melbourne. I hadn't resigned. I hadn't been fired. I hadn't agreed to anything. 3 weeks earlier, the CEO had called me into his office. He said the board wanted to take the product strategy in a different direction. He said they'd hired someone with more industry connections. He said I could stay on as a senior developer if I wanted, reporting to the new person. I asked if this was a demotion. He said it was a restructure. I asked if my compensation would change. He said it would be adjusted to reflect the new role, 30% less. I asked why I wasn't being given the chance to execute the strategy I'd built. He said the board had made their decision. I didn't argue. I didn't protest. I said I'd need time to think about it. He said he needed an answer by end of week. I gave him one. I said I'd accept the demotion. He seemed surprised. He said he was glad I was being professional about it. He said the transition would be smooth. That was 3 weeks ago. The announcement said I'd left voluntarily. The new head of product was already onboarded. My access to strategic documents had been revoked. My title had been changed in the company directory, but my employment contract was still active. My salary was still being deposited. My equity vesting schedule was still running. Because I hadn't actually accepted anything. I'd said I'd accept the demotion. I hadn't signed any paperwork. I hadn't acknowledged any formal changes. I'd simply stopped responding to messages about transition planning. They'd announced my departure anyway. They'd assumed I'd go quietly. They didn't know I owned 18% of the company. Disclaimer: all characters, companies and events are fictional. Any resemblance to real people or companies is coincidental. I'd been employee number 4. The startup launched 5 years ago. The founder, his name was Martin Cross, had recruited me from a larger tech company. He'd offered equity in exchange for below-market salary, standard startup terms. I'd negotiated for more equity than he initially offered. I'd asked for 4%. He'd countered at 2%. We'd settled at 3%, vesting over 4 years. That was my initial grant. Over the next 4 years, I'd received 3 additional grants as performance bonuses. 2% after the Series A, 1% after we hit profitability, another 12% when I was promoted to head of product, all fully vested, 18% total. In a startup with 5 co-founders who each held 12%, 18% was significant. It made me the second largest individual shareholder after Martin, who'd retained 22% after dilution. The board consisted of Martin, 2 venture capital representatives, and 1 independent director. I'd never had a board seat. I'd never asked for one. But I had shareholder rights. I spent the first week doing nothing. I didn't respond to the announcement. I didn't contact Martin. I didn't reach out to the new head of product. I didn't post on social media. I didn't update my LinkedIn status. I logged into the company systems each morning. My access was partially restricted. I could still see code repositories. I could still access basic documentation, but strategic planning tools, financial dashboards, and board materials were blocked. My email still worked. I received automated messages, system updates, HR reminders about benefits enrollment. No one sent me work assignments. No one asked me to attend meetings. No one acknowledged my presence. On day 6, HR sent me a document package. It was labelled Role Transition Agreement, 12 pages. The first page outlined my new title, Senior Product Developer. The second page outlined my new compensation, 30% reduction in base salary, no bonus eligibility, no further equity grants. The third page outlined my new reporting structure. I'd report to the new head of product, who reported to Martin. The final page was a signature block with a deadline: sign and return within 5 business days. I read every page carefully. The agreement included a clause stating that by signing, I acknowledged the changes were mutually agreed upon and voluntary. It included a waiver of any claims related to the restructure. It also included a clause about my existing equity. It stated that unvested shares would be forfeited if I left the company within 12 months of signing. All my shares were already vested. The clause was irrelevant to me. But it suggested they didn't know that. I didn't sign the document. I didn't reply to HR. I saved the file and waited. On day 9, my salary was deposited. Full amount, no reduction, same as it had been for the past year. I checked the payment details. It was categorized as regular compensation for my role as head of product development, the title that no longer existed. I didn't contact payroll. I didn't ask questions. I transferred the money to my savings account and continued waiting. On day 12, the new head of product sent me an email. His name was Derek Chang. He'd worked at 2 major fintech companies before joining. His LinkedIn profile showed 15 years of experience. Impressive credentials. His email was brief. He said he'd like to schedule a meeting to discuss transition planning. He said he valued my institutional knowledge. He suggested Wednesday at 10. I didn't respond. He sent a follow-up 2 days later. Same message, different proposed time. I didn't respond to that either. On day 16, Martin sent me a message. He didn't mention the announcement. He didn't mention my lack of response to HR. He didn't mention the unsigned agreement. He asked if I was doing okay. He said he'd noticed I'd been quiet. He said he wanted to make sure the transition was going smoothly. I replied 6 hours later. I said I was fine. I said I was taking some time to process the changes. I thanked him for checking in. He replied immediately. He said he understood. He said change was difficult. He said he appreciated my professionalism. He didn't ask about the unsigned agreement. Week 3 passed. I maintained the same routine. I logged into company systems daily. I checked email. I reviewed code commits from the engineering team. I didn't contribute anything. I didn't attend any meetings. I didn't communicate with anyone. My salary was deposited again. Full amount, no reduction. HR sent a reminder about the unsigned agreement. The deadline had passed. The email said they needed my signature to process the changes. It didn't mention any consequences for not signing. I archived the email without responding. Week 4. Derek sent another meeting request. This time, Martin was copied. The tone was more direct. Derek said it was important that we align on product priorities. He said the lack of communication was creating challenges for the team. I declined the meeting. No explanation. Martin sent a separate message, asking if there was a problem. I replied that there was no problem. I said I was simply following the transition timeline we'd discussed. We hadn't discussed any timeline. But he didn't correct me. On day 29, I reviewed the shareholder agreement. It was a 70-page document I'd signed 5 years ago when I first joined. I'd reviewed it carefully back then. I'd had a lawyer review it before signing. Section 8 outlined information rights. Any shareholder holding more than 5% had the right to request financial statements, board minutes, and material company documents. I held 18%. Section 12 outlined meeting attendance rights. Shareholders holding more than 10% could attend board meetings as observers unless the board voted to exclude them by unanimous decision. I'd never exercised this right. I'd never asked to attend a board meeting. Section 15 outlined dispute resolution. If a shareholder believed the company was being mismanaged or if their rights were being violated, they could request a special board meeting to address the concern. The request had to be submitted in writing to the company's secretary, currently the CFO, with at least 15 days' notice. I drafted a formal letter. I addressed it to the CFO with copies to all board members. I identified myself as a shareholder holding 18% of the company's issued shares. I stated that I was exercising my rights under Section 8 of the shareholder agreement. I requested copies of all board minutes from the past 6 months, all financial statements from the current fiscal year, and all documents related to recent organisational restructures. I stated that I was exercising my rights under Section 12. I requested permission to attend the next scheduled board meeting as an observer. I did not mention the unsigned employment agreement. I did not mention my changed title or compensation. I did not mention any dispute. I simply requested information I was legally entitled to receive. I sent the letter via email with direct receipts enabled. All 5 recipients opened it within 2 hours. The CFO responded the next morning. Her name was Patricia Wells. We'd worked together for 4 years. She'd always been professional and direct. Her email acknowledged my request. She confirmed my shareholder status. She stated that the requested materials would be provided within 10 business days, as required by the shareholder agreement. She noted that the next board meeting was scheduled for 3 weeks from today. She said she'd confirm my attendance with the board chair and follow up. No questions, no pushback, just procedural compliance. Martin called me that afternoon. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail. His tone was careful. He said he'd received my letter. He said he was surprised I was making a formal information request. He said I could have just asked him directly for any information I needed. He said he wanted to talk about what was going on. He asked me to call him back. I didn't call back. The documents arrived on day 8. Patricia sent them via encrypted email. 217 pages total. The board minutes showed 6 meetings over the past 6 months. I read every page. The February minutes included a discussion about leadership optimization. Martin had proposed hiring an experienced head of product to accelerate growth trajectory. The board had approved a compensation package of $320,000 plus 4% equity for the new role. 4% equity. The same amount I'd fought for and settled at 3% when I joined. The March minutes showed approval of Derek's hiring. The role was described as Head of Product Development, my exact title. There was no mention of restructuring my role, no mention of demoting me, no mention of changing my compensation. The minutes stated that Derek would assume product leadership responsibilities effective April 1st. Nothing about what would happen to me. The financial statements showed the company's current valuation, $48 million. My 18% stake was worth $8.64 million on paper. The statements also showed projected revenue growth of 40% year over year. The company was profitable. Cash flow was strong. There was no financial pressure requiring cost cuts. The compensation section showed total executive salaries. Martin's salary was listed at $280,000. Mine was listed at $240,000. Derek's offer was $320,000. They'd hired someone more expensive to replace me, then tried to cut my salary by 30%. I compiled a summary document. I created a timeline. January. I'm head of product, fully performing, no performance issues documented. February. Board approves hiring a new head of product without discussing my status. March. Derek is hired for my exact role. April. I'm told I'm being restructured into a lower position with reduced pay. I cross-referenced my employment contract. It was a standard Australian employment agreement. Section 7 outlined procedures for role changes. Any material change to title, responsibilities, or compensation required mutual written agreement. Unilateral changes constituted constructive dismissal under Australian employment law. I hadn't agreed to anything in writing. They'd announced my departure publicly and hired my replacement, but my employment contract remained unchanged. On day 43, Patricia confirmed my attendance at the board meeting. She sent the meeting agenda. Standard items: financial review, operational updates, strategic initiatives. Item 7. Discussion of organisational structure and HR matters. No details, no context. The meeting was in 6 days. I prepared methodically. I printed the timeline. I printed the employment contract with relevant sections highlighted. I printed the board minutes showing no authorisation for my role change. I printed my equity certificates showing 18% ownership. I organised everything in a leather folder, clean, professional, documented. I didn't prepare any speeches. I didn't plan any confrontations. I just assembled the facts. The board meeting was held in a conference room at the VC firm's office, downtown Melbourne, 23rd floor. About 10 minutes early. Patricia was already there, setting up. She greeted me professionally. She showed me to a seat at the side of the table. Observer position, not voting position. The board members arrived separately. Martin came in last. He saw me and stopped. Brief hesitation. Then he nodded and took his seat at the head of the table. No one acknowledged the situation. The meeting proceeded through the standard agenda: financial review, revenue up, costs controlled, projections on track. Operational updates, product development progressing, new features launching next quarter. Strategic initiatives, expanding into new markets, exploring partnership opportunities. I took notes. I didn't speak. I watched. Item 7 came 90 minutes into the meeting. Martin introduced it carefully. He said the company had made some organisational changes to strengthen the product team. He said they'd brought in Derek Chang as the new head of product. He said the transition was going well. One of the VC representatives, a woman named Susan Park, interrupted. She said she'd reviewed the minutes from the February and March meetings. She said she didn't recall any discussion about transitioning the existing head of product out of the role. She asked what had happened to Valerie Patterson. Martin said I'd been offered a different position within the company. He said we were still working through the details of the transition. Susan asked if I'd accepted the new position. Martin hesitated. He said we were in discussions. Susan looked at me. She asked if I wanted to clarify. This was the moment. I could stay silent. I could let it pass. I opened my folder. I said I'd been informed on March 21st that my role was being eliminated. I said I'd been offered a demotion to senior developer with a 30% salary reduction. I said I'd been given 3 days to decide. I said I'd told Martin I would accept the demotion, but I had not signed any formal agreement. I said the company had announced my departure publicly despite my continued employment. I said my access had been restricted. I said I'd received a role transition agreement from HR that I had not signed. I said I'd continued to receive my full salary as head of product development because my employment contract had not been formally modified. I slid copies of the timeline across the table. Martin started to speak. Susan raised her hand. She asked to see my employment contract. I provided a copy. She read Section 7. She looked at Martin. She asked if he had a signed agreement from me accepting the role change. He said no. He said we were still finalising the details. She asked how long the details had been pending. I said 46 days. The second VC representative, a man named James Liu, spoke up. He said he wanted to understand the situation clearly. He said the board had approved hiring Derek as head of product. He said there'd been no discussion about my role in that approval. He asked Martin what the plan had been. Martin said the plan was to have Derek lead product strategy while I focused on development execution. He said it was about playing to strengths. James asked why that required a 30% salary cut. Martin said it reflected the change in scope and responsibility. James asked why it hadn't been documented in the board minutes. Martin said it was an operational HR matter, not a board-level decision. Susan cut in. She said that was incorrect. She said material changes to executive compensation required board notification under the shareholder agreement. She asked Patricia to pull up the shareholder agreement Section 14. Patricia did. Section 14 outlined executive compensation governance. Any change exceeding 20% required board approval. 30% exceeded the threshold. The independent director, a man named Robert Tan, had been quiet throughout. Now he spoke. He said the situation was problematic. He said the company had created legal exposure by announcing my departure without my consent, by restricting my access without formal documentation, and by attempting to unilaterally change my compensation without board approval. He said under Australian employment law, this likely constituted constructive dismissal. He asked if the company had consulted with Employment Counsel before proceeding. Martin said he'd handled it directly. He said he'd wanted to keep it simple and professional. Robert said it was neither simple nor professional. He said the company now faced potential legal liability. He looked at me. He asked what outcome I was seeking. I said I wanted my employment contract honoured as written. I said if the company no longer wanted me in my current role, they should for proper procedures for termination, including appropriate notice and severance. I said I was not interested in the reducing position that had been offered. Susan asked if I was requesting to be reinstated as head of product. I said Derek had already been hired for that role. I said I understood the company wanted to move in a different direction. I said I was simply requesting that my departure be handled properly. James asked what proper handling would look like. I said 6-month severance plus immediate vesting acceleration of any outstanding equity. Martin said all my equity was already vested. I squashed the acceleration clause was consent practice.
Robert said 6 months was reasonable given my tenure and the circumstances. Susan asked for a private board discussion. I was asked to step outside with Patricia. We waited in the reception area. 23 minutes. Patricia didn't make small talk. Neither did I. They called us back in. Susan said the board had discussed the situation. She said they agreed that the transition had been handled poorly. She said they wanted to make it right. She said the board was prepared to offer me a separation agreement, 8-month severance, continued health benefits for 12 months, immediate vesting acceleration clause, standard language even though it didn't apply to me, a neutral reference letter, mutual non-disparagement. She said the agreement would acknowledge that my departure was a mutual decision, and that there were no claims on either side. She asked if that was acceptable. I said I'd need to review the written agreement before responding. She said Patricia would have it drafted within 48 hours. The agreement arrived the next day. 11 pages, clean language, everything Susan had outlined, plus confidentiality provisions and a standard release of claims. My lawyer reviewed it. She said it was fair. She said I could probably negotiate for more given the constructive dismissal situation, but litigation would be expensive and time-consuming. I wasn't interested in litigation. I signed the agreement. The severance payment cleared within a week. 8 months of my head of product salary, plus the final 2 months I'd been paid during the limbo period. 10 months total. $240,000. Combined with my equity stake, worth $8.64 million, I'd done well. Derek lasted 9 months in the role. I heard through former colleagues that the product strategy had stalled. Features were delayed. Customer satisfaction dropped. 2 major clients left. The company missed its revenue targets for 2 consecutive quarters. Derek resigned. The board brought in another replacement. Martin remained CEO, but I heard the VCs had reduced his authority. More board oversight, less autonomy. I didn't start a competing company. I didn't badmouth the startup publicly. I didn't contact their clients or recruit their employees. I took 6 months off. Then I joined a larger fintech company as VP of product. Better salary, better title. Stock options in a company that actually valued its people. 18 months after I left, the startup was acquired. The acquisition price was $62 million. My 18% stake converted to $11.16 million. After taxes, I cleared just over $7 million. Martin made $13.64 million from his 22%. He'd pushed me out to bring in someone he thought was better. That decision had cost the company momentum, revenue, and ultimately, valuation. If the company had maintained its growth trajectory, analysts estimated it would have been worth $90 million at acquisition. My 18% of $90 million would have been $16.2 million. Martin's mismanagement had cost me $5 million. It had cost him $7 million. I saw Martin at an industry conference last year. He was starting a new venture, raising seed funding, looking for early employees. He saw me across the room. He didn't approach. I didn't approach either. I still have the folder from the board meeting, the timeline, the contracts, the documentation. I keep it as a reminder, not of revenge, not of justice, just of the importance of reading the terms.